The sound was desperate, raw, tearing at the metallic silence of the barn. A magnificent canine, all muscle and purpose, thrashing violently against his lead, eyes wide with the white flash of pure panic. Deputy Miller's boots skidded on the concrete as he fought to hold the line, his face etched with strain while commands shouted by seasoned officers dissolved into useless noise. This dog, Blitz, wasn't just failing his duty. He was fighting an invisible storm inside his own head, a memory of trauma that made him untouchable, unpredictable, and potentially dangerous. The sheriff, standing rigid against the rising chaos, knew this was the end of the road. No amount of specialized training, no authority, and no force could quiet the demons consuming this animal's potential. But in this moment of absolute professional failure, the only thing that could anchor the canine wasn't a firm command or a reward. It was the quiet arrival of a child who understood the language of silence better than any officer. This is the story of how justice found its voice, not in the gavel, but in a small, gentle hand. It's a testament to the kind of profound courage found in our small towns. The unexpected truth that proves the highest honor comes from simple, unbiased empathy. Where are you listening from tonight? Tell me the name of your town or country in the comments. It helps us know the reach of this truth. The echoes inside the training barn weren't the sounds of dedication, they were the sounds of desperation, amplified by corrugated tin and the cold fear of failure. Claws scraped raggedly against the concrete floor, a frantic rhythm set against the deputies' strained, almost pleading commands. This wasn't a controlled exercise, this was a breakdown, a wild storm trapped inside a working animal, and the energy in that space was thick enough to choke on. He stood near the perimeter watching Blitz, the canine, at the epicenter of the turmoil. The dog was magnificent, built for speed and purpose, but right now, his eyes were wide, white, showing all around the iris, and his body was a coil of muscle trembling not with aggression, but with confusion and sensory overload. Blitz wasn't fighting the deputy holding the lead. He was fighting a memory, a ghost only he could see, and the lead was barely holding him tethered to reality. There's a silent weight every man who wears a badge carries, the burden of knowing when to step in and when to stand clear. When the training moves from instruction to survival, that line gets blurred quickly. The deputies, good men who understood the necessity of maintaining order, had their professionalism stretched thin. They were trained for chaos in the streets, but not for this internal, heartbreaking chaos of a partner who couldn't find his center. The air snapped with the force of Blitz's next lunge. That's when the sheriff, a man whose voice usually didn't need raising to command respect, cut through the noise. He called for everyone to stand back, demanding silence, demanding distance. We tell these stories not just to remember the dogs, but to remember the lessons they teach us about ourselves. If this kind of honest storytelling matters to you, take a moment to subscribe and join this community. We need every voice that values true justice. The physical strain on Deputy Miller, who held the slipping lead, was palpable. His knuckles were white against the thick leather, his boots sliding slightly as Blitz jerked violently, trying to break the invisible cage of his harness. Each time, Miller pulled back, trying to ground the dog with a firm command. Blitz only escalated, convinced the human pressure was the threat he had to escape. We ask these animals to carry the weight of our protection, to walk the thin blue line right alongside us, demanding unwavering courage and loyalty. But sometimes we forget that they are also souls with breaking points, with histories that can haunt them just as surely as old failures haunt us late at night when the town is asleep and the silence is too loud. The sheriff stepped closer, keeping his movement slow, his presence a deliberate anchor in the surging tide. He knew that if Blitz snapped the lead, and he was perilously close, the potential for disaster, for serious injury, or the definitive end of this dog's future was absolute. The thought of putting down a creature with such potential, simply because fear had mastered him, was a deeply bitter pill. He looked at Blitz's heaving chest and heard the rasping breath. A canine meant to uphold the law was currently a violation of all structured rules. It forces a man to question the meaning of honor. Is it honorable to push an animal past its breaking point for the sake of duty? or is true honor found in knowing when to yield and seek a different path? Blitz made one last, tremendous effort. His rear legs dug deep, pushing off the floor, and the harness leather groaned under the stress. For a terrifying second, everyone believed he had finally succeeded in separating himself from human control, poised to bolt through the barn or turn on the nearest moving shadow. The sheriff's gaze, steady and unflinching, demanded order. He wasn't yelling, but his eyes were giving the command that mattered. Halt. He needed the deputies to show their own brand of silent courage right then, to hold still and trust his judgment, even as fear tried to creep in around the edges of their professionalism. The deputies backed slowly away, forming a wide half-circle of tense, watchful family, a unit held together not by blood, but by shared danger and the uniform. Blitz, now relatively free of immediate human contact except for the straining lead, paused, his head whipping left and right, scanning for the threat that had momentarily receded. He was exhausted, panting less from exertion and more from a deep, primal panic. The chaos subsided, slightly, leaving behind the heavy scent of ozone, fear, and shattered expectations. This dog, whose brilliant potential had been the source of so much hope, now stood on the precipice, demonstrating only one hard truth, that sometimes the greatest battles are fought internally, and nobody in the barn knew how to draw the fire out of the storm trapped inside him. A good man learns quickly that paperwork often tells the deeper story, detailing the fractures that lead to the final break. Blitz's file was heavy, documenting not just the stunning potential, the nose that could discern a specific scent among 1,000 others, but also the sudden violent trauma of his former handler's accident, a moment of profound silence that seemed to have permanently shattered the dog's internal equilibrium. Since that day, the K9 possessed a unique dichotomy, brilliant acuity paired with crippling overstimulation. It was as if his finely tuned internal computer could process the most complex equations of scent and tracking, only to seize up completely when faced with simple, repetitive human direction. He had all the hardware necessary for high justice, but his operating system was corrupted by fear. The unit had spent weeks cycling through every established method, desperately trying to find the missing key. Deputy Jenkins, known for his soft voice and patient demeanor, tried positive reinforcement, using every imaginable tone shift and subtle body cue to create a safe space. Blitz accepted the treat, but the underlying tension never eased. Other deputies, embodying the kind of strong, silent courage necessary in fieldwork, tried the sharper, concise commands, seeking to re-establish a clear hierarchy and structure that might ground the dog. But the firmness of the voice, intended to stabilize, only seemed to trigger the dog's defense mechanisms, pulling him further into the internal maelstrom. The consensus slowly solidified. Nothing could reach the core of the problem. Changing the distance, adjusting the rewards, extending the time, every variable was manipulated, yet the dog remained either frantically agitated or utterly shut down, his body physically present, but his mind somewhere unreachable, trapped in a feedback loop of panic. For the sheriff, the struggle became a moral one. His sense of honor demanded that he give every creature, especially one dedicated to public service, every fighting chance. But justice also demanded accountability and, crucially, safety for his handlers and for the community they were sworn to protect. A K9 partner cannot be a liability in the field. The meeting earlier that morning had been grim, held over lukewarm coffee and the sound of the wind rattling the window panes. Every deputy spoke with reluctance, admitting their exhaustion and their failure to connect. They all loved the dog, respected his potential, but they couldn't risk the inevitable. The time for sentiment was running out. He saw the animal not just as a tool of the law, but as a wounded soul. The decision to retire, or potentially put down a K9, is the hardest kind of failure a handler can face. It feels like breaking a promise to the only part of the department that operates purely on loyalty and unconditional family bond. The sheriff had already prepared the paperwork. The training cycle had a firm end date, and without a demonstrable breakthrough, a genuine, sustainable sign that Blitz could manage his internal storms, the program would have to be terminated. The burden of that final judgment settled on his shoulders, heavy and cold. He looked around the barn now, cleared of the worst chaos but still holding the stench of stress. These good men, full of dedication, possessed all the traditional tools of authority and enforcement, but the one thing they lacked was the ability to soothe a spirit wounded by an unseen tragedy. Their methods were designed to confront the external threat, not heal the internal one. Blitz, they agreed, wasn't bad. He was just overwhelming. Like a magnificent dam built with one fatal flaw, he was always on the verge of collapsing under the sheer weight of his own power. He needed quiet, but the life of a K9 is anything but quiet. The men dispersed for a brief break, retreating to the relative silence outside, leaving the barn empty and the tension suspended in the dust motes dancing in the high sunlight. They needed distance from the failure, unaware that the answer wasn't going to be found in another file review or another command, but in the arrival of something small, gentle, and utterly unexpected. The midday sun slanted low through the high western windows of the barn, illuminating the dust in golden shafts, a moment of unexpected peace after the morning's intense pressure. The men had scattered, some grabbing bottled water, others leaning against patrol cars, their conversation low and focused on anything but the failure inside. That silence was the moment the door creaked open, announcing a shift in the atmosphere. It wasn't the arrival of backup or a superior officer, it was just a mother and her child. Ella, the sheriff's young niece, arrived with her mom to drop off the standard midday provisions, the fuel for the men who stand guard. She was small, perhaps 7 years old, with the kind of quiet observation in her eyes that often sees more than any adult's trained vigilance. Ella heard the muffled, residual barking before she saw the cause. Even though Blitz had calmed slightly from his peak frenzy, the barn still radiated that residual energy of struggle, a psychic residue of fear that hangs heavy in the air, much like the lingering sound of a distant gunshot. Holding her mother's hand, she paused at the edge of the large double doors and slowly, hesitantly, peered inside the cavernous training space. The adults exchanged hurried, worried glances, the kind that silently warns a child away from something dangerous or difficult to explain. Blitz was still tethered, guarded, and unpredictable. But Blitz, sensing the movement near the light, was immediately drawn out of his dull, stressed watchfulness. When he turned his head and saw the figure framed in the doorway, the chaotic energy that had been humming through his system suddenly went taut, then stiff. It was an instantaneous transformation. The frantic panting, the restless shifting of weight, all of it ceased. The dog went utterly rigid, not in fear or aggression, but in an abrupt, profound stillness. He wasn't staring at the uniform or the leash. He was locked on the small child whose energy was unlike anything he had felt all morning. The sheriff saw the change instantly, an unsettling shift in the dog's focus that arrested his own movements. He had anticipated rage or a sudden lunge. He did not anticipate this frozen curiosity. The silence from Blitz was louder than any of his earlier barks, demanding total attention and a reassessment of the threat level. In that profound silence, Ella's mother gently tried to pull her back, whispering warnings that the dog was having a bad day and should be left alone. But Ella, fixed on the intense, burdened eyes of the K9, stood her ground with a quiet courage that seemed wholly innate, not learned. Blitz's posture suggested a moment of choice. He wasn't calculating an attack. He was calculating an experience. His head tilted slightly, almost inquisitively, the intensity in his gaze now lacking the sharp edge of panic. It was a look of deep, searching family connection, reaching out across the chasm of their different species. This moment was a small providential hinge upon which the whole story would turn. It reminds you that sometimes the answers to complex problems of justice aren't found in volumes of procedure, but in the innocent, unbiased heart of someone who hasn't yet learned to complicate the world with assumptions. The sheriff held his breath, waving his sister back with a slow hand movement, commanding stillness from everyone present. He recognized the shift in Blitz. The panic had been momentarily overridden by a curiosity so potent it had managed to anchor the dog in the present moment, something his trainers had failed to achieve with all their expertise. The child stood there, completely unaware of the protocols and the deep-seated fears surrounding this magnificent, troubled animal, offering the simple, profound honesty that only pure innocence can possess. That connection, curiosity supplanting fear, was the first sign of hope the sheriff had seen all day, a narrow pathway leading out of the storm. Despite the low, urgent murmurs of the deputies, concerned voices warning her to stay clear of the unpredictable K9, Ella took the first measured steps into the center of the training area. Her movement wasn't swift or driven by bravado. It was the slow, deliberate pace of someone who intuitively understands that rushed energy only generates resistance. This was the kind of courage that doesn't wear a uniform. It simply exists in the quiet acknowledgement of vulnerability. She ignored the professional concerns of the Guardians, acting on an impulse of pure, unadulterated human-animal understanding, stepping into a moral space that adult caution feared. To tread. She stopped several feet short of Blitz's perimeter, maintaining a safe, respectful distance, and then she knelt. It was a gesture of profound submission, a lowering of authority, making her small form level with the dog's gaze. She wasn't taking command. She was offering partnership, the first lesson in true honor. What happened next was a lesson none of the seasoned deputies had ever learned in their advanced K9 seminars. Ella didn't utter a single command word. No sit, no stay, no sharp correction. Instead, she began to mirror him. She matched his cadence of breath, consciously slowing her own rhythmic intake until she was breathing with the same heavy, deliberate focus Blitz was displaying. She lowered her gaze, looking down and slightly away, avoiding the direct, challenging eye contact that professional handlers are often taught to use to establish authority. She understood, without being told, that Blitz didn't need pressure or authority. He needed the space to choose, to recognize the lack of threat. The frantic, shallow panting that had plagued Blitz for hours began, subtly to soften. His ears, which had been pinned back in anxiety, relaxed slightly, tilting forward. He was recognizing the shift in energy, reacting to the absence of demand, a vacuum of expectation in a room suffocatingly full of it. If this genuine connection and silent act of justice moves you, please take a moment to comment "Justiça" here below. Let us know you value the moments when kindness transcends protocol. Ella's small hands, scrubbed clean of the world's complexity, were then lowered to the concrete floor, palms facing down, utterly open. This was not a move of submission alone. It was an invitation, pure and simple, devoid of expectation or demand. It was a silent acknowledgement of the dog's worth, an invitation to a truce. Blitz tilted his massive, intelligent head, studying the child. His body language was still cautious, but the trembling that had characterized his morning was now replaced by an intense, focused curiosity. He saw no threat in the small figure, only the profound, unwavering stability that the world had denied him since his trauma. The deputies watched, frozen by the sight. They understood the deep, unspoken truth that sometimes the most effective forms of courage involve not dominance, but vulnerability, and that the strongest bonds of family are often formed outside the lines of blood or established protocol. This moment defined the true concept of the Guardián Silencioso, not the one who shouts the loudest, but the one who listens the deepest. Ella, in her profound innocence, was offering the K9 the gift of being understood, a concept tragically missing from his structured, demanding training regimen. The air thinned again, no longer heavy with stress but light with possibility. The K9 was poised, weighing the invitation against the ghost of his past. The next move would come from him, not the child, and that was the critical difference. The silence that followed was so complete it seemed to absorb the outside sounds of the town. No distant siren, no rumble of an engine, just the collective held breath of the men who upheld the law, witnessing something they couldn't control or explain. Then, slowly, deliberately, the breakthrough began. Blitz didn't bound forward in a rush of enthusiasm. He executed a careful, almost surgical inching movement, driven by an irresistible curiosity toward the small hand resting on the gritty floor. Every step was a battle against his own overwhelming history, a conscious choice to trust this new, soft energy. And then, It happened. He stretched his neck, his magnificent nose, reaching out and touched it gently, a soft, exploratory bump against Ella's palm. It wasn't a sniff of professional acknowledgement. It was an act of personal connection, a fragile bridge built across the chasm of their different worlds. At that exact moment, the tension in Blitz's powerful frame melted. His tail, which had been clamped tight against his body for hours, eased slightly and began a slow, deliberate wag, the first sign of genuine canine contentment anyone had seen all day. It was a rhythmic pulse of quiet family recognition. The deputies remained motionless, silent witnesses to this profound correction of the universe. They had brought all their training, all their tools of justice and structure, and yet it was the innocent, unbiased heart of a child that had achieved what all their professional courage could not. The sheriff watched, his throat tightening with an emotion stronger than pride or relief. It was recognition. He understood instantly that Blitz wasn't wild, wasn't fundamentally aggressive or defective. He was merely overwhelmed, highly sensitive, needing a channel of communication that honored his fear instead of trying to dominate it. Ella, feeling the soft touch of the canine's nose, maintained her stillness, offering no sudden movements, only acceptance. She wasn't seeking a victory. She was simply offering a connection, which is often the highest form of honor we can extend to another living soul. This single, quiet moment unlocked a truth the unit had missed. Blitz required patience, profound and unyielding, coupled with a communication style that operated on gentle invitation rather than forceful command. The training path defined by authority and pressure was exactly what had been fueling his inner storm. The revelation hit the sheriff like a moral thunderbolt. His canine unit, built on principles of strength and swift action, had been using the wrong language. Ella's natural calm proved that effective law enforcement, the kind that truly seeks justice, must sometimes embrace vulnerability and quiet understanding before it can achieve true discipline. Blitz settled down, resting his chin carefully on the floor, still near Ella's hand, a magnificent guardian finally at peace. The training barn, once a crucible of anxiety, became a sanctuary of understanding. The path forward, though still challenging, was now clear. It required integrating Ella's intuitive method into the official protocol, using non-verbal cues, mirroring, and above all, infinite patience. The unit realized that the greatest strength is often found not in the weight of the hand, but in its tenderness. The story of Blitz's restoration became a quiet legend in the department, a testament that the measure of a man's courage is not just how he confronts the obvious enemy, but how tenderly he handles the wounded soul. And so the K9 began his new journey, guided by a principle none of them had anticipated, knowing that true healing begins not with a command, but with a quiet, patient understanding. We look for power in the big things, in the heavy hand of the law, in the volume of the command, in the complexity of the training cycle. But sometimes the true measure of courage is found in the stillness, in the refusal to exert dominance, and in the profound humility of admitting that strength requires listening. What kind of authority do you possess if you cannot bring peace to the wounded? What does justice truly mean if it ignores the inner life of the soul, whether man or beast, because it doesn't fit the established protocol? The silence Ella brought to that barn reminds us that the greatest bonds of family are forged not through expectation, but through acceptance. It asks you, where, in your own life, are you applying pressure when gentleness is required? Where are you demanding compliance when what is truly needed is the safe space to be vulnerable? The truth is, true honor requires us to look past the file, past the label of problematic, and see the potential struggling under the burden of fear. The story of Blitz and the little girl is a silent sermon on the power of quiet providence. Don't let these deeper truths pass you by. Subscribe to this channel and let's keep walking this road together, looking for the quiet acts of heroism that define a life well lived. May you find the gentle strength you need today.